I've always believed that love was something you proved, not proclaimed. That was the kind of man I tried to be. I wasn't flashy, and I never felt the need to make grand speeches or orchestrate tearful moments. I just showed up, consistently, quietly, every day. I married my wife, Denise, when I was 39, and with her came a daughter, Alyssa, who was 12 at the time. She didn't warm to me immediately, and I didn't expect her to. I wasn't her dad. Her real father, Tony, had dipped in and out over the years, mostly out, and when he was around, it was always with gifts and empty promises. I was the opposite of that. I was the one who helped with homework, who fixed her science projects the night before they were due, who sat at parent-teacher conferences pretending like I hadn't just worked a 10-hour shift. And for a while, I thought that would be enough. I thought she'd see me. Maybe not as a father, but at least as someone who gave a damn. Denise used to say, "She'll come around. Just keep being there." So I did. I helped pay for her braces when Tony was between jobs. I co-signed on her first car, a used Honda Civic that she drove into the ground within a year. I even took out a small loan to cover her college dorm expenses when her financial aid fell short. And I never once used it as leverage. I didn't dangle my help over her head or expect her to gush about how grateful she was. I just wanted her to know that I cared, that someone had her back, no matter what. But through it all, she never called me dad. Not even once. She stuck to Mark like it was a line drawn in the sand, permanent, non-negotiable. And honestly, I told myself I was fine with that. Labels didn't matter. Love was in the actions, not the words. Or so I thought. The bridal shower invite came 2 weeks before the event, and it wasn't even a direct message. It was dropped into the family WhatsApp group with a casual, bridal shower. Everyone from the fam is invited. Can't wait to see you all there. That was Alyssa's way. No personal touches. No effort. Just a general blanket statement like she was inviting coworkers to a potluck. I scrolled past the message the first time. Didn't even click on the PDF attachment. I figured I'd sit this one out. After all, I wasn't family in the way that mattered to her. But then Denise cornered me in the kitchen one evening, her voice gentle but firm. "You should go," she said, placing a hand on my arm. "She's your daughter too." I laughed, dry, bitter. "Since when?" I asked. But she didn't answer. She just gave me that look, the one that said, "Don't start something tonight." So I nodded, put the date in my calendar, and told myself it'd be fine. Just a few hours. A gesture. The day of the bridal shower, I stood in front of my closet longer than I care to admit, wondering what a stepfather's presence was supposed to look like. Casual button-down. Too lazy. Full suit. Too formal. I settled on a blue-collared shirt and khakis, safe, unassuming. I drove there alone because Denise had gone ahead early to help set up. The venue was a rented hall downtown, filled with pink and gold streamers and too many people I didn't recognize. As soon as I walked in, I felt it, the shift in energy, the awkward glances. A few people nodded politely. One I vaguely knew gave me a quick hug and moved on. I scanned the room for Denise, but it was Alyssa who spotted me first. Her eyes narrowed, and for a second, I thought she'd look away. But instead, she marched right up to me, her voice loud enough to silence half the room. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, not even trying to keep it private. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Paying bills doesn't make you family," she said, each word like a slap to the face. The room went dead quiet. I looked around, hoping for someone, anyone, to step in. No one did. Not Denise. Not even the aunt who had hugged me. I nodded slowly, fighting the urge to let the humiliation boil over. "Got it," I said, and I turned around and walked out without another word. I didn't hear Denise call after me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she was just as stunned. Or maybe she agreed with her daughter. Either way, I got in my car, sat behind the wheel for 5 whole minutes, and just stared at my hands. They were trembling. That night, I didn't speak to anyone. Denise came home late, and we avoided the topic like it was a live wire. She moved around the kitchen like she didn't know what had happened, or didn't want to. I poured myself a drink and sat on the back porch, staring into the dark. For the first time in years, I felt like a fool. All those birthdays, those gas bills I paid when her apartment heating broke down, the late-night calls I answered when her car broke down, none of it had bought me a place in her heart. I was a bank. A shadow. Convenient until I wasn't. I replayed her words over and over. Paying bills doesn't make you family. Then what does? What was I supposed to do differently? Be louder? Be Tony? Around midnight, I went to the office and opened my laptop. I didn't rage or cry or break things. I just opened the wedding folder I had meticulously organized. Deposits, contacts, payment schedules, contracts. I started from the top. The florist, canceled. The DJ, called and revoked. The caterer, refunded the deposit. Photographer, baker, venue decorator, all of them gone. I didn't make a scene. Didn't tell anyone. I just erased myself from the wedding the way she had erased me from her life. If I wasn't family, then I had no business investing another dollar into a celebration I wasn't welcome at. It was that simple. Or maybe it wasn't. But that's what I told myself so I could sleep that night. And I did sleep, like a man who had finally stopped carrying something that was never his to hold. I didn't talk to Alyssa after the bridal shower. Not the next day, not the next week. I didn't reach out to explain myself or ask her why she humiliated me in front of a room full of people. And the truth is, I wasn't looking for an apology. I was done chasing crumbs of respect from someone who saw me as disposable. What bothered me wasn't even what she said. It was how easily it came out of her mouth. No hesitation. No guilt. Like she had been waiting for the chance to say it all along. I realized then that the relationship I thought we had never really existed. It was a fantasy I built out of years of silent sacrifice and unspoken hope. A fantasy that shattered in 10 seconds flat under the glare of overhead lights and a room full of fake smiles. Denise avoided the topic like a bomb ticking under our bed. I could see it in the way she tiptoed around the kitchen, offering me cups of coffee and quiet pats on the shoulder as if that would soften the blow. I didn't blame her, not really. She was stuck in the middle. Torn between the man she married and the daughter she raised alone for so long. But her silence spoke volumes. She didn't defend me. She didn't pull Alyssa aside and say, "That man helped raise you." She just stood there at the shower, lips tight, eyes averted, pretending she wasn't watching me fall apart. I knew right then that I couldn't count on her to stand between me and Alyssa's sharp tongue. So I made the decision alone. Every vendor I'd hired for the wedding had my name on the contract. My bank card. My approval. That meant I could cancel everything without needing to explain myself to anyone. And that's exactly what I did. I started with the florist, a sweet woman named Lorna who I'd personally driven an hour out of town to meet. She had designed elaborate arrangements based on the Pinterest board Alyssa emailed me, full of blush roses and cascading eucalyptus. I sent her a message. Due to unforeseen circumstances, I'll have to cancel our contract. Please consider this my formal withdrawal. She replied kindly, offered to return half the deposit, and wished me well. Next was the caterer, $4, $800 down, chicken piccata, and vegan sliders. Cancelled. The DJ, a young guy named Trell who had even let Alyssa preview his wedding mix at our house one night, gone. One by one, I unraveled the threads of a celebration I had stitched together for someone who wanted no part of me. Denise caught on a few days later when she overheard a voicemail from the decorator. "Hey Mark, just confirming that we've received the cancellation notice. Sorry to hear about the change. Let us know if you need anything else." She walked into the office, her arms crossed, her face tight. "What are you doing?" she asked. I looked up from the computer, completely calm. "Reallocating resources," I said. She stared at me, not angry, just stunned. "You're canceling her wedding?" I turned in my chair, looked her straight in the eyes. "No. I'm canceling my contributions to it." Big difference. She didn't say anything for a full 30 seconds. Then she whispered, "She's going to be devastated." I shrugged. She should have thought of that before telling me I'm not family. That night, Alyssa texted me. "Hey, just confirming the cake tasting for Thursday. Mom said you drive me." I stared at the message, the nerve of it. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't gutted me in front of 30 people and thrown my years of support back in my face. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, she followed up. "Are we still on?" Still, I said nothing. The next morning, Denise asked me if I was going to text her back. "She doesn't even realize what she did," she said. I laughed. "No, she does. She just doesn't care." And that's when it really hit me. Alyssa never respected me. Not deep down. I was the backup parent, the financial fallback, the man who filled in when her real dad disappeared. And the moment Tony resurfaced, fresh out of rehab, full of charm and new apologies, she latched onto him like no time had passed. He was the one she wanted at the altar, the one she imagined walking her down the aisle, not the man who'd been there every day in between. Over the next week, the texts from Alyssa came less frequently. Then Denise started fielding calls from vendors wondering why they'd been dropped. She tried to play mediator, but I told her flat out, I won't fund disrespect. Period. And I meant it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was just done. I had spent too many years bending over backward for a girl who treated me like a ghost when it suited her. The wedding wasn't just about two people getting married. It had become a test of what I was willing to tolerate. And I had finally reached my limit. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. I didn't go on social media or send out a statement. I didn't warn Alyssa or try to make her beg. I simply removed myself from the narrative. Quietly. Decisively. She wanted a wedding without me? Fine. Let her have it. Let her real father walk her down the aisle and smile for pictures while I stayed home and watched the clock tick. I owed her nothing. Not anymore. And yet, even as I closed out those accounts and deleted calendar reminders, a small part of me grieved. Not for the money, not even for the wedding, but for the years I spent trying to earn something that was never mine to begin with. I grieved for the birthday cards I wrote that she never read, for the job applications I helped her with that she never thanked me for the way I once imagined she might call me dad at her graduation. That man, the one who believed kindness could buy closeness, was gone now, replaced by someone older, wiser, and far less willing to be used. The morning of Alyssa's wedding felt quieter than it should have. There was no flurry of activity in the kitchen, no last-minute errands, no frantic phone calls echoing down the hall. Denise had left early that morning, saying little more than wish me luck. She didn't kiss me goodbye. She didn't ask me to come. She just grabbed her purse and slipped out the door like a woman who knew she was walking into a storm. I sat at the kitchen table in my usual chair, sipping coffee, scrolling through the news, pretending it was just another Saturday. But in the back of my mind, I knew today would mark a turning point, not just for Alyssa, but for all of us. At 11:03 a.m., my phone rang for the first time. I didn't even check the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then came another call, and another. By 11:15, my phone had rung 6 times. I muted it and placed it face down on the counter. The ceremony wasn't supposed to start until 2 p.m., but clearly, something had already gone wrong. Part of me was curious, maybe even a little smug, but mostly, I felt a strange stillness inside, like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for years. There was no vindictiveness in it. No joy, just quiet finality. I had pulled the plug. Now they were scrambling in the dark. By noon, Denise was calling too. Then came a long, desperate text from Alyssa. Mark, what's going on? None of the vendors are here. Did you cancel everything? I stared at it for a moment, feeling that old tug of responsibility rising in my chest. For a split second, I wanted to cave, to explain, to justify, to soften the blow. But I reminded myself, this wasn't punishment. This was consequence. She didn't want me involved. She made that perfectly clear. So I typed out a single message. You told me I wasn't family. Ask your real dad. I hit send and turned my phone off completely. I didn't go anywhere that day. Didn't leave the house. I made myself a sandwich and watched reruns of old crime dramas, the kind with predictable endings and no emotional investment. Every so often, I glanced out the window, imagining the chaos unfolding at that rented event hall. Guests arriving to an empty venue. No decorations. No music. No food. Just confusion and whispers. I wondered if anyone was blaming me aloud. If they were calling me selfish, bitter, vindictive. Maybe they were. But none of them had been there for the last decade. None of them had seen what it was like to love someone who barely tolerated your existence until she needed something. By late afternoon, Denise returned home. Her heels clicked loudly against the hardwood floor, a sharp staccato that echoed through the house. I looked up as she entered the living room, her face pale, her lipstick smeared at the corners. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, clutching her purse like it was the only thing anchoring her. It was a mess, she finally said. her voice low, cracked. I nodded once. I figured. She sank onto the edge of the armchair, burying her face in her hands. She cried, Mark, in front of everyone. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to apologize for that. She had earned those tears. She said you humiliated her, Denise added, her eyes meeting mine now, searching for remorse. She said you ruined the most important day of her life. I sighed and leaned back in my chair. She humiliated herself. I just stopped paying for the show. Denise flinched slightly, but didn't argue. She knew the truth, even if it was bitter. She knew Alyssa had pushed me away and expected me to keep giving anyway. That's the thing about being the dependable one. People start to think your loyalty is automatic. That no matter how many times they step on your pride, you'll keep showing up, checkbook in hand, smile in place. An hour later, Alyssa's number called again. Then a voicemail pinged in. I waited until Denise went upstairs before playing it. Her voice was tight with anger. No trace of the daughter I once tucked into bed or drove to doctor's appointments. I don't know what kind of stunt you were trying to pull, but you better fix this. People are talking. I look like an idiot. If you think I'm just going to let this slide, you're wrong. You owe me, Mark. After everything, you OWE me. I sat there, stunned, not by the words, but by how utterly hollow they felt. There was no apology, no reflection, no understanding. Just entitlement and rage. I replayed the message once more, then deleted it. I didn't bother calling back. There was nothing left to say. In that moment, I felt something inside me finally break loose. Some tether that had kept me emotionally invested in a relationship that had always been one-sided. I thought of all the times I bent myself backward to make her feel safe, supported, loved, and how effortlessly she'd dismissed me when I stopped being useful. Her words, "You owe me," rattled around in my head like pennies in a tin can. I didn't know her a thing. Not anymore. The wedding, from what I heard later, went on. Sort of. Some distant cousins rallied to throw together a bare-bones reception. Someone ran to a grocery store and bought pre-made cupcakes. Alyssa's biological father, Tony, showed up 2 hours late, reeking of beer and cologne, and tried to make a speech that nobody could understand. Denise told me all this days later, her voice soft, her eyes tired. I think she expected me to gloat, or at least smile. But I didn't. I just nodded and said, "That sounds about right." Because it did. That's what happens when you build your big day on shaky foundations. You end up with nothing but broken pieces and unmet expectations. By the end of the week, I had received 7 missed calls, 4 voicemails, and 2 emails from Alyssa, each one angrier than the last. She demanded I reimburse her for the new expenses. She threatened to tell everyone what I did. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded them to Denise and said, "Your daughter has something to say. Maybe she should say it to you." I wasn't going to defend myself anymore. I had nothing to defend. I had done what any man with self-respect would do when faced with disrespect. I walked away, and I didn't look back. It didn't take long for the family group chat to erupt like a hornet's nest. By Monday morning, the same WhatsApp thread where Alyssa casually dropped her bridal shower invite had become a battlefield of passive-aggressive remarks and thinly veiled accusations. It's sad when people can't put their egos aside for a special day. One aunt posted, clearly aimed at me. Another relative chimed in. Some folks love control more than they love family. I read each message without replying, my face calm, but my stomach twisting into knots. These were people who hadn't shown up for Alyssa's graduation, who hadn't sent her a single dollar when she was broke in college. But suddenly, they were all invested in her well-being now that there was drama to dissect. I could almost see them in their kitchens, phones in hand, drinking their morning coffee while scrolling and whispering. Can you believe what Mark did? I wasn't surprised by the hypocrisy, but I'll admit, it stung. These were the same people who once praised me for stepping up and being the man she needed. I remembered buying Alyssa her first prom dress and listening to her cry in the dressing room because her real dad hadn't returned her calls. That same night, her Aunt Carol had hugged me and whispered, "You're the only stable one in her life." Now, Carol was posting, "Some people forget weddings are about the bride, not their hurt feelings." I nearly laughed out loud. Hurt feelings? That's what they thought this was about. I had spent a decade being a constant presence, a financial crutch, and a father figure. And they thought I was mad because I didn't get a thank you card? No, this wasn't about feelings. This was about finally setting boundaries after years of being emotionally milked and discarded. I stayed silent in the group chat. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain my side. I knew it wouldn't matter. People don't want context, they want villains. And in Alyssa's version of events, I was the perfect one. She spun it well, too. Told everyone that I canceled the vendors last minute out of spite. Said I ruined her wedding because I was jealous of her reconnecting with her real father. She never once mentioned what she said to me at the bridal shower. Never admitted that she publicly rejected me, dismissed me, reduced me to a walking wallet. No, in her version, I was an insecure stepfather having a meltdown. And in a world where perception outweighs truth, that was all people needed to hear. Denise tried to stay neutral, but even she couldn't escape the pull of the narrative. One night, as we sat in the living room with the TV humming in the background, she turned to me and said, "Maybe you should have just let the wedding happen. You could have talked to her after." I stared at her, stunned. You mean after I paid for everything? After she publicly humiliated me? After she let her father play the hero while I footed the bill? Her lips tightened. I'm just saying, maybe it didn't have to go this far. That's when I realized something deeper. Denise was more worried about appearances than truth. She was embarrassed by the fallout, the gossip, the whispers. Not because she disagreed with what I did, but because now everyone knew. And in her eyes, that made it worse. I got a call from my younger brother 2 days later. Luke and I weren't especially close, but he had a sharp sense of justice, and he didn't tolerate BS easily. "I've been watching the chat," he said without even saying hello. "These people have some nerve." I let out a dry chuckle. "You think?" He sighed. "You did more for that girl than her own father. If it were me, I would have canceled the wedding sooner." I appreciated that, more than I could say, because up until that point, I was starting to question myself. Was I too harsh? Did I go too far? But Luke's words grounded me. He reminded me that I wasn't crazy for drawing a line. That it's not vindictive to walk away from a relationship where you're only valued for your utility. Later that night, I found myself rereading some old texts from Melissa. Messages like, "Mark, can you help with my rent?" Or "Can you look over my resume?" And the occasional, "Thanks for always being there." But even those thank yous read hollow now, perfunctory, transactional. I had mistaken convenience for closeness. I thought I was being accepted when really, I was being used. And that realization was more painful than the public blowback. Because deep down, I had wanted her to love me. Not just tolerate me. Not just acknowledge me when it suited her. But love me, like a father. And now, I saw clearly, that door was never really open. The final straw came when Denise's cousin Marcia posted a cryptic message in the group chat. "People who claim to love you but ghost your wedding? That's not family. That's manipulation." That was it for me. I opened the chat, scrolled up, and hit Leave Group. The screen blinked once, then confirmed, "You have left the group." I set my phone down and exhaled like I had been holding my breath for years. I didn't care if they thought I was bitter. I didn't care if they made me the villain in their little family soap opera. Let them talk. Let them speculate. I was done defending myself to people who never knew the full story and never cared to ask. The next morning, I took a walk through the neighborhood. Just me and the breeze. No phone, no distractions. As I passed each house, I realized how much noise I had let into my life. Not just from Alyssa, but from all the people who made me feel like I owed something for loving someone else's child. As if I needed permission. As if the love I gave was somehow less valid because it didn't come with DNA. But I knew what I gave. I knew what I endured. And I knew that stepping away wasn't cruelty. It was survival. When I returned home, Denise was at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, frowning. "You left the group chat?" she asked. I nodded. I'm not going to sit there and be gaslit by people who don't know the truth. She didn't argue this time. She just looked at me, like she was seeing me in a new light. Maybe she was. Maybe she finally realized I wasn't going to play the quiet, compliant man anymore. Not when it cost me my dignity. It's funny how silence can be louder than 1,000 accusations. After I left the group chat, the phone call stopped. The texts dwindled. The digital storm that had swirled around me for days died off without warning, like someone flipped a switch. And in that sudden stillness, I was left with nothing but my thoughts and the slow, steady weight of everything I'd carried for years. I'd spent over a decade being Alyssa's safety net, walking that invisible line between stepfather and stranger, always hoping that if I gave enough, stayed long enough, did right often enough, one day she might see me for who I was. But the only thing she saw was someone to blame when the fairy tale didn't play out the way she imagined. And the saddest part? I had trained her to expect that from me. I had taught her that I'd always show up, no matter how little she gave back. That was the real cost of kindness. It made me invisible. I think people like to romanticize sacrifice. They love the image of the devoted stepfather who gives and gives and gives, always smiling, always understanding. It makes for a good movie plot. But no one wants to talk about what happens when that man reaches his limit. When he realizes that being the better person only works if someone's actually watching, if someone cares. And in my case, no one did. Not really. Not the relatives who applauded me at holidays. Not the co-workers who said, "You're a good man, Mark." And certainly not Alyssa, who only ever looked in my direction when she needed something. I had become a background character in my own life. Always present, never seen. Denise and I started living like roommates. We shared meals, exchanged polite conversation, but the closeness had vanished. There was no more us, just two people orbiting the same house, bound by a marriage that suddenly felt like a contract instead of a commitment. She wasn't angry at me. If anything, she was just distant. I could see the gears turning behind her eyes, trying to reconcile the man she married with the one who had drawn a hard line in the sand. I think she expected me to fold eventually, to extend an olive branch, to be the bigger person. But I didn't, because this wasn't just about Alyssa anymore. This was about me. About reclaiming whatever pieces of myself I'd given away too freely over the years. One afternoon, I met up with an old friend for coffee, Marcus, a guy I'd known since college. He was one of the few people who knew me before I became stepdad Mark. As soon as I sat down, he raised an eyebrow and said, "You look like you've been through hell." I laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it wasn't bitter. "You're not wrong," I replied. Over 2 lattes, I told him everything, about the shower, the canceled vendors, the family fallout. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, not once interrupting. And when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Good." I blinked, confused. "Good." He nodded. "You finally stood up for yourself. I've watched you pour yourself into other people for years and never ask for anything back. Maybe it's about damn time you stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't even notice if you disappeared." His words hit hard because they were true. I had always measured my worth by how useful I was to others. If I wasn't helping, fixing, providing, I didn't know who I was. And somewhere along the line, I had accepted that as love. But love without respect isn't love at all. It's servitude. And I wasn't willing to live like that anymore. Not for Alyssa. Not for Denise. Not for anyone. That night, I sat alone on the porch, a bourbon in hand, and let myself feel everything I had buried over the years. The disappointment, the quiet resentment, the exhaustion of being the good guy who never got the credit. I thought about the times Alyssa had introduced me as my mom's husband, instead of just saying my name. The birthdays she forgot. The Father's Day cards she never sent. And I thought about the moment she looked me in the eye and told me paying bills didn't make me family. That sentence had looped in my head for weeks, but now, it felt less like a wound and more like a release. She had said it to hurt me. But in a way, she had freed me. Because once someone tells you who you are to them, believe them, and move on. Denise came out onto the porch, sat beside me in silence. After a while, she said, "She's still not speaking to me." I nodded, but didn't say anything. "She blames me now too," she added. "Says I should have stopped you." That got a bitter laugh out of me. "Did she ever once ask you to stop her?" Denise shook her head slowly. "No." We sat like that for a while, the distance between us more emotional than physical. Finally, she whispered, "Do you regret it?" I turned to her, my voice steady. "No. I regret not doing it sooner." I knew in that moment that our marriage might not survive this. There was too much silence between us. Too much history unspoken. Denise loved her daughter. I understood that. But she had never truly understood what it meant for me to be a stepfather, to love a child as your own, knowing full well she may never return the favor. She had expected me to keep giving without boundaries, without question, and when I finally set a line, she didn't know how to stand beside me. I wasn't angry at her for that, but I couldn't ignore it either. In the weeks that followed, I started to rediscover myself. I spent more time alone, not out of sadness, but clarity. I took walks without needing to be back by a certain time. I read books I'd forgotten I owned. I called my sister, who I hadn't spoken to in months, and told her everything. She cried on the phone and said, "You deserve better, Mark." And for the first time, I believed her. By the time Alyssa's scaled-down wedding took place 2 weeks later, I was already emotionally gone. I didn't ask about it, didn't check Denise's phone for updates, and didn't care enough to wonder who eventually stepped in to fill the gaps. I heard from a neighbor that the event had been a mess. Awkward, underwhelming, and cobbled together by a handful of family members who thought showing up last minute made up for years of absence. I didn't need the details. I knew exactly how it would look. A thrown-together ceremony, a stressed-out bride, a groom trying to hold it together, and a drunk father stumbling through a speech no one wanted to hear. And somewhere in the back of that crowd, Denise, sitting tight-lipped and tired, probably wondering what her marriage would look like after all this dust settled. The truth is, I didn't take any joy in how it fell apart. That might surprise some people. I wasn't sitting on the couch cackling like some vindictive villain, cheering for her to suffer. It wasn't about revenge. What I felt was closer to vindication, a deep, quiet knowing that I had finally stood up for myself in a world that expected me to roll over and keep giving. That feeling, more than anything, was what gave me peace. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need Alyssa to wake up one day and suddenly realize everything I'd done for her. That fantasy was dead. All I wanted was to no longer be the man who betrayed himself in the name of being the bigger person. I was done with that. I was done saying sorry for expecting respect. I noticed a shift in how people treated me, too. Not just in the family, but in the way friends and acquaintances responded. The ones who really knew me, who had seen the sacrifices firsthand, offered quiet nods of approval. My brother Luke, for instance, dropped off a bottle of bourbon with a handwritten note that read, "For finally acting like the damn man I knew you were." Even my barber, a no-nonsense guy named Carl who never said more than 2 words during a haircut, asked, "You good?" That's all. Just you good. But the weight behind it hit me hard. Because sometimes, that's all we want, to be asked if we're okay, not judged for why we had to do what we did. Denise was trying, in her own way, to bridge the widening space between us. She started making small talk over dinner again, asked about my work, left the TV on during shows she knew I liked. But it all felt like patchwork, temporary stitches over a relationship that had been fraying long before the bridal shower. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the last bits of summer fade, she said, "I keep thinking this will blow over." I looked at her, not unkindly, but with an honesty I hadn't shown in months. "It won't," I said, "because it's not just about what happened. It's about what's always been happening." She looked down, nodding, silent. And in that moment, we both knew that something fundamental between us had changed. Alyssa never reached out again. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not to scream or accuse. Nothing. Just silence. That should have hurt more than it did. But by then, I'd let go of the idea that closure had to come from the other person. Sometimes closure is a choice, a decision to stop bleeding for someone who never noticed the cuts. I realized that I didn't need her to acknowledge me as a father. I didn't need her to say thank you or admit she'd been wrong. I only needed to give myself the permission to walk away and never look back. In the months that followed, I started rebuilding a life where I was no longer an accessory to someone else's world. I reconnected with friends. I picked up woodworking again, something I hadn't touched since before Alyssa moved in. I even joined a local hiking group. Me, the guy who used to plan every Saturday around other people's needs, now out walking trails for no other reason than it made me feel free. Denise noticed the change. She said I seemed lighter. And I was. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped carrying things that were never mine to begin with. We talked about counseling once, me and Denise. She brought it up hesitantly, like a child asking for something they're sure will be denied. Do you think we could talk to someone? I considered it, not because I thought a stranger could stitch us back together, but because it felt like an honest gesture, a rare one, and I owed her that much, to at least see if something in us could still be salvaged. We scheduled one session. The therapist asked a lot of hard questions. At one point, Denise cried. I didn't. I just sat there, calm, explaining why I was done performing love for people who didn't love me back, whether that was Alyssa or anyone else. The therapist nodded slowly and said, "It sounds like you finally know what your boundaries are." I smiled for the first time that hour. "Yeah," I said, "and I plan on keeping them. Maybe the marriage will make it. Maybe it won't. But for once, I'm not afraid of either outcome. Because I know who I am now. Not the guy who bends himself backward to be liked. Not the man who trades silence for peace. But someone who, after years of playing the background, finally stepped forward and said, no more. No more apologies for demanding respect. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. No more pretending that love without acknowledgement is enough. As I sit here now, writing this out more for myself than anyone else, I feel a clarity I've never felt before. I wasn't wrong to cancel the wedding support. I wasn't petty. I wasn't spiteful. I was just finally done being used. And if that makes me the villain in someone else's story, so be it. I'd rather be the villain with a backbone than the hero with no self-respect. Sometimes walking away isn't bitterness, it's clarity. If you've ever been pushed aside by someone you showed up for, this story might resonate deeply with you. Have you ever reached your breaking point with a family member who took you for granted? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your story and your strength. And if this hit home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories about love, loyalty, and the power of setting boundaries. See you soon in the next story.